All right, everyone, a bit of a two-parter here because we've actually got two relatively recent Trump stories, one from the last 24 hours, one a little bit older than that, actually, from the prior news cycle, the prior news day, which the cycle doesn't apply anymore. We got two stories on Trump. I figured I'd roll them up into one video because neither of them are interesting enough for their own video, but together it's like, well, what a wild 48-hour period it's been. The first is that, did you know that Trump has had affairs? Yes, indeed. First link in the description, archived, of course, to a story that's been broken today. Apparently, the claim is that the National Enquirer back, I guess, some decades ago, shielded Trump from a sex scandal where he had fathered a child with an employee and paid her off or something, and then, the Enquirer got involved and shielded him for no apparent reason, just, I guess they were friendly with him at the time, and said, okay, we're going to shelve the story. They paid for the story, and then they decided to shelve it in order to defend Trump. Now, what proof is there of this? Well, again, as usual, it's just speculation. Is it true? Who cares? Trump's doorman is the one saying that he had fathered a child with somebody. All right, maybe so. Again, this is some time ago. It has nothing to do with contemporary issues. It's not even from 2000 onward. I'd say anything that happened before the year 2000 at this point is outdated. The problem is that a lot of people, as they get older and nostalgic or something, they still think of the further past is not that far. When I'm a little kid, I'm thinking the 70s. Oh, that's 20 years ago. No, it's far more than that now, but it still sort of sticks in your mind from your formative years. There are people, the Democrats still think it's the 90s. You look at Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign for an example of this. Everyone knows, though, that Trump has slept around. Yeah, everyone's known. Now, if somebody came forward and said, hey, this is Trump's kid that he had illegitimately with me back in the 1980s or something, if some person comes out and claims that, they do a DNA test, they do something like that, okay, then I guess it's true. Otherwise, it's just speculation. People claim that about the rich and famous all the time in hopes that the person will try to shut them up by throwing money to them. Essentially, our court system, in some cases, not all, but in some, incentivizes people to lie about such things. They had a drunken romp years ago, and they're like, oh, I'll just say that Trump fathered him or something, I worked for him, maybe I'll just claim it's his, maybe he'll pay me off to get me to shut up. He'll have me sign an NDA and I know I'll be like Stormy Daniels, I can get a six-figure total. Now that sounds good to me because, I'm here living in my working class apartment, I'll finally be able to afford a new car. So that happens. Of course it happens all the time. It happens with sex scandals and claims of that nature too. Now, some of them, you have a Weinstein or a Cosby, it becomes a little bit more than you can chalk up to just, a bunch of people decided to lie for money. At that point, it doesn't make sense to say that anymore. But with Trump, we've got a small number of people who have claimed that he screwed them. In some cases, we have corroboration. Like with Stormy Daniels. Okay, he had sex with Stormy Daniels. So what? I don't care. It doesn't have any bearing on his presidency. Therefore, it doesn't affect me. That was when he was a private citizen. Look, if Stormy Daniels was a Russian espionage agent, okay, then you can say that it might be pertinent. She's not, though. She was just a porn star. Who fucking cares? It doesn't have any bearing on my life. The second story is that the FBI raid on Trump's former lawyer's house and office, Cohen. Apparently, that was for tidbits about the Access Hollywood tape. Yeah, so in other words, that has nothing to do with Russia. Nothing to do with the Russian collusion, nothing to do with money laundering. It has to do with affairs, really, with Trump's sexual proclivities. How does this have any bearing on Mueller's investigation? I don't think that we're ever going to know. It's very funny. So many people, they've glossed it over already. They don't even care about the fact that the FBI raided a lawyer, someone who is accredited as a lawyer. They raided their home and office. Under the guise of, well, this has something to do with the Mueller investigation, we find out it has to do with a fucking Access Hollywood tape that was already public to begin with. It was already public knowledge. How does this have anything to do with the original scope of the Russian investigation that Mueller was supposed to be engaged in? The claim was made to the U.S. population. We need a special investigation into Trump and his campaign on the basis that we think there's probable cause to say somebody in his campaign or something might well have colluded with a foreign state. Election law was broken. Something happened. Instead, we find out that it has to do now with Manafort and Tony Podesta and money laundering from 10 years ago. Nothing to do with Trump's campaign. It has to do with people who simply were on his campaign who had goofed up 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And then we find out that it has to do with an Access Hollywood tape. Who cares about these things? Again, Trump has affairs. Okay, that's a revelation. Nobody knew that before he was in office. Nobody knew that Trump was a ladies' man who was fond of sleeping around, and yeah, I guess he likes getting spanked with, now what was it, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or something, or Time Magazine. Who cares about that? Does it affect your day-to-day life? A lot of people will they'll clutch their pearls. Now, even though they're on the left, they'll pretend to be like moralists and say, oh, it's just horrible. Did you hear what Trump did? He had an affair. A lot of people just say, well, he fathered an illegitimate child back in the 80s. He abandoned his child. Again, prove it. If you don't have evidence of it, it's simply a claim that's being made by someone who worked with Trump at the time. Maybe it's true, but again, what bearing does it have on the political situation? I would be concerned if I heard that Trump was sleeping around in a contemporary sense. If he were sleeping around in the White House, if he were having several affairs right now, that might be pertinent. And if those individuals were like from some other country, or they were politically connected, they were in the media in some way, then it would be pertinent, certainly. I have no evidence to suggest that that's the fact. I have no evidence that he had an affair anytime recently, certainly since he's been in office. He was a private citizen. It's like the idea of him working with Russians. When he was a private citizen, that didn't matter. Why would it have mattered if he takes investment from some Russian? He takes investment from people from the UK and Australia all the time. An Indian investor, a Saudi investor. All of these rich, politically connected people do that. Of course, money flows around. It's totally malleable as far as where the money is at any given time. There's an overlap, certainly. Here's where the Enquirer and stuff like that fit in. There's an overlap between DC and Hollywood. There's an overlap with Wall Street. Of course, it's the power structures of the Western world. Places where the rich and beautiful and famous gather. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of overlap between them. They hang out together, as opposed to hanging out with the little people, you know, the fans that they claim to love so much, the voters they claim to represent, and the smaller investors they claim to want to shield, and certainly they care about the larger economy and not just their own pockets. No, really not. And that includes Donald Trump is a multi-million-dollar Manhattan magnate. He's not a Bible thumper from some hayseed town. He is not an evangelical or a moralist. He sleeps around. He lived the coke snorting life without apparently ever having snorted coke, which is probably to his credit. And it may not be true. Maybe he's not a teetotaler. Maybe that's a total lie. Who cares? You know, ultimately, I want him to be able to suck down a couple Coca-Colas if he gets a call at 4 a.m. saying a situation's occurring with China or Russia. Absolutely. That's why one good reason why I voted against Mitt Romney. Wouldn't get behind him. You know, the Republicans had shafted Ron Paul. That pissed me off, and I stood on principle. But also, I don't want a teetotaler president, really. I don't want a president who's prudish. I think that would be a bad thing. That's a bad way to present the United States. It'd be like if Trump is out, our president would be Mike Pence. I think that would be a greater problem than anything Trump could ever concoct. I almost think that he put Mike Pence in that position just so he'd never be impeached. Because the alternative, even his most far-left adversaries look at the two of them and say, oh, Trump, at least he can kind of be reasoned with sometimes. Mike Pence won't even sit down at a table with another female unless his wife is next to him. You know, it creeps them out a little bit because I guess he doesn't believe in having affairs. You know, in a maybe a bisexual manner, or he's not AIDS positive enough or something. But no, come on, these aren't scandals though. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing. Okay, his lawyer may have paid off Stormy Daniels. So, did he do it in an official legal capacity or as a friend? Well, if it was the latter, good luck, by the way, proving that. I think that's why they want to look through this correspondence. They want to see whether Trump commanded him to pay it off, behind the scenes, sort of in an unofficial fashion, I guess, to keep it off the political table. That's what they're hoping, but Mueller is making a fool of himself. If that's the best that if Mueller, after all of this time investigating, can only come forth with, well, there's some fishy stuff with his lawyer on an affair he had 10 years ago, that's not going to be impeachable. That happened long, long before he was in office. You can't impeach him for something like that. Statute of limitations on that would have run out long ago. It's not a major crime. That's a white-collar misdemeanor at best. Who fucking cares? It's none of Mueller's or anyone else's business anyway. It has nothing to do with national security, nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with collusion, nothing to do with money laundering or anything specifically felonious. It may not even be against the law at all. It may just be like dubious. Well, you know, if you investigated every dubious thing that happened in D.C., good luck ever getting any sleep again, Mr. Mueller. By the way, I thought it was funny. There was some Ukrainian investor, and they were looking into his donation to the Trump charities there. And then they conveniently left out the part where he had donated enormous sums to the Clinton Foundation at multiple points prior. That was not in the New York Times write-up. I can't remember his name. Some Ukrainian investors. Just look up Ukrainian Trump charity or something. Be able to find links for it. Make sure to archive them if you spread them around. Don't ever share links to lamestream media sites unless you've archived them first. Use some sort of site to do that. You know, you should support alt media. You shouldn't support the corporate media. Because, I mean, look, everything they're typing, everything they're running now is either Enquirer-style tabloid spew, or it's an outright lie, or it's a lie by omission and structure in some cases. That's about as close to the truth as the New York Times or CNN gets at this point. Don't they realize how they're becoming tabloids? Again, I'm going to warn them. They'd be well worth listening to this. You are falling for Trump's strategy, which is to push you into clickbaiting so much nobody trusts you anymore. You will become the Enquirer. You will become the Weekly World News. And there's no escaping from it. Once you've gone down the drain, you're not going to be able to crawl back up. You're already swirling around. You're pretty close to it right now. Most people in the United States no longer trust the lamestream media. You're more likely to find that they trust a blogger or a vlogger or something like that. And that's, by the way, it's to people's credit. It shows their intelligence. Because they realize that there are still people online with smaller presences, alt media presences. They're actually independent. They're not controlled by some company. That's why they're more honest. You know, nobody's paying me to say anything in specific. I get a bunch of people that crowdfund to me, or I sell books. No, that doesn't include an element of control. That's not the Coca-Cola company told me to squish some story about the EPA. That's not some political movement said, here's 50 grand if you will basically endorse this candidate in a roundabout way. And I'm sure I'm sure that they reach out to people who are larger creators than me and ask them to do that. I'm absolutely sure. And some of them are probably already compromised for all I know. It's just thankfully, at this point, it remains largely a pro-liberty platform here on YouTube. At least the creators are, as well as elsewhere. It's wonderful. That's about all. Peace out.